What's up, everybody? Thanks for listening to the Fadam and Friends podcast. I'm your host, Adam Tiller. Fadam and Friends is a storytelling-themed podcast featuring guests from all walks of life. I've been lucky in my life to meet a lot of interesting people, and this show will feature interviews with these folks while covering an eclectic list of topics. Nothing's really off limits, but the focus will be on the following areas: relationships, dating, work, sports, gambling, mental health, music, business, drugs, entertainment, and anything else that's fun. In preparation for the show, I've asked each guest to prepare stories from their personal lives. These stories will be anything from humorous to heartbreaking. The goal of this podcast is to share these interesting stories with new people and hopefully entertain along the way. Before we get started, I'd like to do a couple reads from our sponsors. Fadam and Friends is brought to you by absolutely no one. Absolutely no one is present amongst all of us. You may experience absolutely no one when you are alone, nervous, or lacking self-esteem. Even during times of joy, you may feel like absolutely no one is there. Whenever you experience absolutely no one in your life, remember to listen to Fadam and Friends podcasts. Also, Fadam and Friends is brought to you by Big Ron's Vodka. Big Ron's Vodka is a discount vodka available down at the Stowe. Big Ron's Vodka is distilled almost once and is a multi-purpose beverage. Big Ron's Vodka is known for its unique flavor and scent. Next time you choose to drink or disinfect an open wound, make sure to choose Big Ron's. And remember, kids, just like Big Ron says himself, if you're gonna drink and drive, drink Big Ron's.
It's been a short ride, but man, it's been a crazy one. The shit we seen and overcame, and all of it has made us some hell of a bunch of kids with stories for the ages of how the hell we got here. You can read it in the pages of receipts and tweets and poems that we left along the way. Every day is something new. I see the look on mama's face. I know this world is sick and it's twisted. The kids never listen.
Today's guest is a good friend of mine from Mill Creek, Washington. His name is Soroosh Abdi. Soroosh is an entertainment and sports lawyer based out of Seattle. I met Soroosh while I was attending Seattle University School of Law. At the time, Soroosh was the youngest registered Major League sports agent for the MLS in the U.S. Since graduating from law school, Soroosh has gone on to represent several professional soccer players, both domestically and internationally. For comparative purposes, after dropping out of law school after only 1 year, I went on to pursue 6 months of unemployment. His current law practice focus on entertainment law and criminal defense. He's an avid soccer player and video game enthusiast. Soroosh, thanks for coming on the show. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thank you very much. Happy to be here. Excited.
Nice, man. What's new with you?
Nothing new right now. I'm heading into what's called the transfer window. So for those who aren't familiar with international soccer, players can be transferred from team to team. So unlike the NBA, where players only move during free agency or during a trade window, in international soccer, clubs can essentially pay a fee called a transfer fee to the selling club, and the selling club would then release the player, subject to the player agreeing to personal terms with the buying club. And you can do that 2 times a year in each league. So right now we're heading into the summer transfer window in Major League Soccer and the Chinese Super League, which are 2 markets that I work very intimately in.
Does it have to be during that specific window of time, or
to conclude a financial transfer? Yes. If a player is free from contract, then they could sign with really any team at any point in the year, unless it's too late in the season, and that varies league to league.
Nice.
And I want to say something real quick. I'm not doing criminal defense anymore. I quit that racket.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I quit.
How come?
You know, soccer's always been my main thing. So when my career took off in sports agency in 2015, I was in the middle of a contract public defender position. And I learned a lot. I did very well. I really enjoyed litigation and the trial experience. But long term, I know that was going to end my life like 30 years prematurely.
It wasn't your dream job?
It was not my dream job. I really enjoyed the trials. It was really exciting. But I knew that sports was going to be something that could be very exciting, that could be a lot more fulfilling, and could allow me to live a lifestyle that I wanted to live.
What was the like worst case that you had to deal with in terms of like the craziest?
Oh, damn. The worst case that I've had to do. I've had numerous times where I represented as somebody who had a very bad history. Okay, they had a lot of sex offenses in their history, and this individual was charged with 2 counts of assault, domestic violence, one one being against their young child, and one being, and sorry for the downer for when those of you listening are surrounded by absolutely no one. I don't mean to put you in a dark place with this story, but these are the realities of our justice system, especially in rural America. So my client was somebody who had a bad history of sex offenses, and years later I then represented him. I was appointed to represent him because it was a public defense gig, and he was charged with 1 count assault, domestic violence against his wife. That took place 1 day after he was charged with assault, 4th-degree domestic violence against his child. And I represented him on both matters. And there were many weaknesses in this case as far as from the prosecution's perspective. But the prosecution was not interested in having what I would call a good faith negotiation. Let's strike a plea bargain. They were not very interested. And I was told numerous times by this prosecutor, your guys got to do cold, hard time. So I would present the issues with the case. I would present the defenses that we had available, the weight of their evidence or lack thereof, and the guy simply was not having it.
Yeah.
He was ready to go with a taxpayer-funded trial, win or lose.
Yeah.
That's the mentality we were dealing with.
Is that pretty common with like rural county prosecutors or just prosecutors in general?
Here's the irony: they were easier to deal with in rural America than they were in the big city.
Yeah.
I've gone up against some of the most arrogant, entitled prosecutors I have right here in Seattle on the west side. So,
what's the contributing reason for that, do you think? Like, is it just to move up the ladder, or ego, or what drives that behavior on their part? Because it seems independent of their purpose. It seems like it's almost on top of their, responsibility, quote unquote, to the city and people.
It's a very good question. I've spent a lot of time thinking about it because I've had to do a lot of work that I deem unnecessary as a result of prosecutors who refuse to engage in good faith conversations about a case. And on that note, I'll answer the question, but I have been in 9 jury trials and victorious in every single one of them.
Hell yeah.
That's not because I'm this grandmaster wizard of litigation and defense or anything crazy like that. No, that's because prosecutors have routinely pushed very poor cases.
Yep.
Okay, very poor cases, and I've had the advantage, and I would say that.
Yeah.
There have been some cases that were close, but these prosecutors are not weighing a case appropriately, and they have the discretion to push a case that very well should not be pushed. Okay,
Yeah, it seems like a misalignment of incentives too. Like they're pursuing that maybe for the reputation or whatever, and it's not really in line with what they're supposed to be doing.
Here's my theory, and I am a prosecutor-friendly person.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm pro-law.
Makes one of us.
Yeah. Here's my theory, and I've spent a lot of time thinking about it. And it all starts with the illusion of law school. Okay, you go to law school, just take out the student loans. Just take them out.
Yeah.
It's going to be all worth it in the end.
It's only 150 grand.
It's only 150,000. You can be making 6 figures right out of law school.
Or 60 grand.
Look at these fantastic employment statistics provided to you by Appalachian State University School of Law. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And these people go and they drink the Kool-Aid. They get drunk off the law school Kool-Aid. Oh, I'm going to join moot court board, or I'm going to be the comments editor at my law school, and then I'm going to come out. There's going to be a nice 6-figure job waiting for me. Reality is, particularly in the Seattle area, where we have what is relatively a poor legal employment market, that's not the case.
Yeah.
There aren't going to be very many good job opportunities waiting for you, not the ones that were gallivanted around law school career fairs.
I mean, when I was in law school for the long duration of time that I stayed, that beautiful year, I remember looking at like opening positions. It was like 60 grand a year getting out of law school. And the math just didn't make any sense whatsoever. I mean, at the time, interest rates were a lot higher, so student loan debt would have been substantially higher. But I just looked at it, and I would sit in those rooms, and first, I didn't like being in the rooms to begin with. The people were absolutely crazy. But second, the math didn't support any of the work that I was doing, and I'm way too lazy of a person to work that hard for just, like, I don't even know what they're doing, because a lot of those people aren't working jobs that they actually enjoy to do, and most of the jobs that they are not like morally grounded work. It's just like you're spending 3 years working your ass off, then another year trying to pass a bar to then do a job that you hate. Like, it's just poor planning, it seems like.
And you bring up a very fair point, which is the point I'm trying to make too. Take that idea. You graduate law school, you don't have the opportunity you thought you were going to have, that you worked so hard to pass all your law school exams, to do well in extracurriculars in law school, to sit for the hell test called the bar exam. Yeah. And now the light at the end of the tunnel is not very bright, okay? A lot of people take prosecutor jobs, all right? These are available all around, every county, many a city, municipal courts, district courts, they all need prosecutors, okay? And the starting pay at a lot of these places is much less than 6 figures. And what I think is that prosecutors, they're extraordinarily overworked. They have many cases. They have to sit in and arrange interviews. Yes, they have support staff, but more often than not, a prosecutor job is going to require someone to work 10 plus hours a day, okay, if I had to give it an estimate. When you're working that much with little reward and very high stress, tense negotiations, trials in which you have an opponent that's trying to wreck you, because this is the realities of our justice system.
And you're
Trial is
balancing
war.
multiple cases while maybe this defense attorney's got 1 or 2 or
much less than what you have a private
like
defense attorney
that's
will
their
have.
their primary focus is on that one thing, whereas you've got mounting obligations constantly. And
Correct.
on top of you said 10 hours a day. I know a guy that went to school with us, and I mean, the assumption is, yeah, maybe you can get a prosecuting job in Seattle. Well, they're so competitive, like getting that inner city prosecuting job is not easy. So then you have to go to a different county, and you're riding the bus like 90 minutes a day, and just being around the worst of people too, like on the outskirts, and it's just a disaster, you know?
There's a lot of difficulties. But when you may not be getting the reward that you think you should be getting, when you're extremely overworked, when you may have commuting issues, like you just mentioned, all these things tend to weigh on the person, which is the prosecutor in this situation. And if this person is maybe they have short patience because of these stressors, they may not have as much empathy anymore because they've looked at cases. When you look at 100 DUI cases, well, when you get to like the 10th one, like, you're all drunk, okay?
Yeah, exactly.
It doesn't matter. It's like, you're all drunk.
Yeah.
When you get to that lack of empathy, which is very common in my negotiations with prosecutors, I think they start to maybe think long-term, like, wow, this isn't very comfortable for me right now. Am I going to do this forever? Well, no, I want to be a judge, or I want to be a senior prosecutor, or if I want to move up to felonies. And the best way to do that is to win cases in trial.
Yeah.
So if you see maybe a case that you can easily solve through negotiation, they may be incentivized to try the case. Now, this is very hypothetical. This is very abstract, this idea. But prosecutors are, I think, incentivized to get convictions as charged.
Yeah.
Okay, so if a defendant pleads as charged, great. But if they need to convict as charged through a jury trial, okay, it's the defendant's choice to take a deal. But if it's not a good deal, if it doesn't recognize the weaknesses of the case, then it'll go to trial.
Yeah.
And I can tell you, although I've been very fortunate in jury trials, most jurors do not understand what beyond a reasonable doubt means, and most jurors are very prosecutor-friendly.
Yeah.
So it's an uphill battle for the defense, although the defense should have the advantage, given the prosecution has the burden of proof.
Definitely. Well, I know you wanted to talk about criminal defense this entire time. We can, but why don't we shift a little bit? Shift a little bit to sports. So when I met you, we were at Seattle U School of Law, and you were just getting into like sports representation, wanting to be an agent, and at the time you were with Summit Sports Group. And did you have players at that time, and how did you get into soccer sports agency?
I got into soccer sports agency. I always was interested in it. I was interested in it when I went into law school. And when I started law school, I started thinking more and more about it because you're always motivated in law school to think about your career. What are you going to do after law school? Because you may want to get involved in certain clubs or internships or courses at law school. So start thinking about what you want to do. I started thinking about it, and the more and more I got into my first quarter or semester, I should say, at Seattle Law, I just started realizing, wow, I do not want to write memos and briefs all day and research this stuff. And if I miscite something, if I write id but I don't include the page number or something like, or anything, to get my head chopped off at a big firm. Like, I'd rather be more of an entrepreneur. I'd rather be more of an advocate, which is, I think that is my skill set, advocacy.
Yep.
And one theater that really intrigued me was the sports the sports business intersect, which with my skill set, agency, I think is the best way to have gone about it. So I was in legal writing, hating the class because the professor wasn't educating us. They were saying, so what do you think about this? Well, what about that? What if I were to put this here?
Yeah.
What do you guys think? You're paying $120,000, $150,000 for legal education. They're playing hide the ball with you.
Yeah.
And you get 6 other classes, so you just get so annoyed by it. This annoyance and just this approach really made me pursue sports earlier than I was going to.
Yeah.
So my first year, I started researching how to become a sports agent in soccer. I had to get certified or licensed by the United States Soccer Federation. I took an entrance exam in 2012 in Chicago. I passed the test. I was then able to begin representing players in MLS and beyond.
And you were the youngest agent at that time?
At the time, I was told I was the youngest registered, youngest licensed agent, which I'm sure has been defeated now because they don't have a test anymore. It's just the registration. So you can be 18 as long as you don't have any felonies. Go recruit some players.
Yeah, so they kind of knocked out that accolade you had.
Yeah, I guess so. It was fuck the accolade. It's about who you represent, the money you've generated for players, and your work product, and that's what I'm really proud of.
Yeah. So, who was your first player, and how long did it take to sign him?
It didn't take very long. I had been recruiting a player already, and the agency I was with, I started out as an intern in the summer of 2012. And then that fall/winter, I got licensed, and they gave me the essentially the leeway to go ahead and begin the soccer business. It was a collaboration.
Yep.
And I recruited a player named Anthony Arena. He's a local player. He's from Bothell, Washington, Kenmore, Washington.
Yep.
And my family's from Kenmore, and we really hit it off. He was a very big player in Washington State as a youth. He played at Wake Forest for 4 years, did very well, and he ended up being drafted by the Houston Dynamo in the MLS draft, I think 2013 MLS draft. And I had the honor of, I wouldn't even call it a negotiation. It was really a take it or leave it. And but the first contract on the books, I think it was like $40K, $50K.
Oh, wow.
I was so thrilled.
Yeah.
There's $1 million contracts right now that I pay big attention to, but I paid the exact same attention to his $40,000, $50,000 contract.
What was the first thing you did with the cut you got? Was it just go straight to Azel's Fried Chicken?
I did that one for free.
Oh,
so
really?
He'd recommend me to other players. Yeah, no money. And I didn't give a shit now. It's really, I have a business. The bottom line's very important, okay? And I think about that sometimes, whereas back then, I was willing to do stuff for free for players so I can show my work product, to generate work product.
Yeah, word of mouth.
Exactly. But now I have significant work product in different countries in the commercial aspects of the game and on-field transactions as well, where I can now reflect to those when I'm speaking with players and marketing myself. Back then I was like, hey, I'm Soroosh Abdi. You haven't done shit. Give me a chance.
Yeah, exactly. But that's how you have to start, right? I mean, there's not an easy way to get into that business. Like, you either kind of have to work for free or you have to do something for people to recognize your worth, right?
I had to make it worth their while because when they were signing with me, they weren't signing with, and this is simply because I was younger and inexperienced, okay? They were signing with a young and inexperienced, although very competent, agent. So I had to develop the work product, and that is what enabled me to grow my practice, to grow my business, and to be able to market myself to bigger players in the future. So earlier on in my career, I had to really do a few transactions out of good faith, and the fees on those were not sizable whatsoever anyway. And I was so young and excited to do it as well that it
Yeah.
was very easy.
Was it fun?
Um, it was exciting because I was engaged in the process, but they weren't inherently fun transactions where you're negotiating a bunch of different terms. So comparing that Anthony Arenas contract to the largest contract I negotiated in MLS was, I think, a $14.4 million deal for Obafemi Martin's 4-year deal. And that contract had very detailed incentives and bonuses, options, marketing royalties, large monthly salary, housing, relocation, a bunch of different things that had to be negotiated. A lot of research that goes into finalizing a transaction like that, and which I found really exciting
Yeah.
for those reasons because of the different factors in that negotiation. Whereas with the first contract I ever negotiated for Anthony Arena, it was exciting to be a part of it because I had never been a part of something like that before. But the actual substance of the contract, not very exciting. No.
Yeah. Is that where you think like a good agent drives value for a player where if he wasn't represented, like those details within the contracts themselves, that's where a good agent separates himself? Or is it is a lot of that stuff boilerplate, like set in stone for most of the players?
Um, I wouldn't say for most of the players. For some class of player, a lot of that stuff is boilerplate. And for those of you listening, this is really my experience in Major League Soccer and international soccer. NBA, it could be much. I don't have much knowledge about the specifics of an NBA contract or an NFL contract. But as it relates to soccer in the States, um, for I guess your younger players and the more unestablished guys, they're taking it's standard bonuses. They're not very exciting. It's very easy for them to outperform the contract and not be rewarded through incentives mechanisms that are negotiated by the representative in the contract. Whereas if you're higher profile, so for example, I also represent Kim Ki-hee in the Seattle Sounders. He had close to $1 million salary last year and this year. Kim had incentives where if he was the team defender of the year, he's a defender. So
Yeah.
he had incentives for team defender of the year, league defender of the year, MLS All Star, MLS Best 11, appearance, and if they qualify for certain competitions, where if he performed at a certain level and his performance led to certain team achievement, he was going to be rewarded for that.
Yeah.
And if he achieved a certain, if he was an MLS All Star or Best 11, his following year's salary would go up by, I think, by 6 figures, some
wow.
amount. So these things, I not only have the leverage, but I have the duty to make sure my guys are not outperforming. Because
Who
the second,
provides that criteria? Like, do you come up with that stuff, or is it the team that says, like, if he meets these gates, then he will qualify for additional bonuses? Or is it both you and the team coming up with that criteria together?
we're coming up with it together. The first thing I do in anything, whether it was my past career as a litigator or whether it be as a player representative in in transactions, I prepare. Preparation is the most important thing. You can't be a dumbass walking in and wanting to talk about money. You have to know exactly your value, exactly your strength, your rights, your obligations, and then you can start asking for shit.
Yeah.
Plain
And
and simple.
when you're doing that preparation, what are you looking at?
I'm looking at as many analogous player contracts as I can. So I have access to every contract drafted in MLS history, and I have one player, okay? And I think this player is worth this much money. I need to be able to present the case.
Yep.
Okay. So I look at some of the highest paid players. So in Kim Ki-hee's example, he's a center back. I think Kim Ki-hee is among the very best center backs in MLS.
Yep.
Okay. I look at the highest paid MLS center backs, their salaries, their contracts, their bonuses, their incentives, maybe some other accommodations like airfare allowance for them and their family, a housing stipend, could be a variety of things. And I then begin to build the case for my client. I say, well, my client has this many clearances a game, this many tackles a game, this many shots blocked a game.
Yep.
The goals allowed average is 0.8 as opposed to this player who's allowing who's on a defense that allows like 1.2, and he's making this much money. This is his value. And then on top of that, you can present a good case, an analogous contract analysis for your client and
Yep.
say, my client, as analogized to the top earners in this league, he's making less while performing at the same or above level as them. But you really need to also posture and say, and if you don't pay him, he's going to go to China. He's going to go to Korea. He's going to go to Europe. He's going to go to the Middle East. So that's how you build your negotiation position. It's called a BATNA, a best alternative to a negotiated agreement. If I could show my ability to slam the door on the opposition in negotiation is very easy, that gives us power.
Yep.
So preparation through numbers, preparation through analysis, and preparation through generating alternative opportunity, this allows us to get what we want.
Yep. That makes sense. So pivoting a little bit here, what influenced you to become like a sports agent? Was it like Jerry Maguire, or what was the first thing that you saw that you're like, this is why I want to do this for the rest of my life?
Well, I wouldn't say I wanted to do it for the rest of my life. I want to do it for the foreseeable future. And then depending on what happens in the MLS marketplace, maybe operate on the team side of things.
Mm-hmm.
But that's a whole different topic. I was in a fraternity in college, and I had
I give him a shout out quick.
Sigma Nu at University of Washington. Go Gamma Chi. And in the fraternity, I had a room that was called the Dungeon, and it was the only room in the house. It was bottom floor. Okay, this thing was it's exactly what it sounds. It was a dungeon. Okay, and there was 3 of us in the dungeon, and oddly, it was the only room in the house that had cable. So when we were watching Sports Center or NBA playoffs or NFL games, it was always in the dungeon.
Yep.
Okay, and all the guys in the house would come in and fit in the room and watch the playoff game or Sports Center. And we'd always be debating about like, oh my God, Melo got that deal. LeBron's way better. And we would start, and at a very early age, I was like 19, 20, we would start getting into, well, why is this player worth more than that player? And not knowing anything about it was actually a good place to start, if that makes sense. So for example, it was better for me to start delving into that kind of the mental practice of what a player's value is, not knowing anything, because then I generate for myself, well, yeah, why is this player more valuable to this other player? Look at his social media. Being millennials, like that's a very important thing to us. That's a very engaging thing when it comes to brands and personalities and whatnot.
So you didn't narrow the scope of creating an objective value just based off of like just analogous contracts or other players and stuff. You were willing to look at it from different points of view.
Exactly. So one good example of that is, I think his name's Chris Anderson, who was on the Miami Heat. And Chris Anderson,
Birdman?
Yeah, Birdman.
Yeah.
Birdman was well, you know better than this, so let's talk about this live. Birdman, if my memory serves me correct, wasn't an outstanding NBA center. He did well at what his duties were, rebounding and listen, I'm a soccer.
Yeah.
Go for it. But he wasn't. But his personality, his off-field or his off-court demeanor, his demeanor on the court, that stuff had value.
He had
to it as well.
likability.
Yeah, that stuff had value to it.
He was somebody that kids would see and it would be fun. Like, I mean, he played a character in addition to the position he played on court.
Exactly. And when you see that stuff, so before I became a professional in the industry, I was able to see those things and learn that a player's value is not limited to strictly their on-field or on-court performance. A player's value comes from what they do for their community. A player's value comes from what they do for their team. A player's value comes from, do they make their teammates better? A player's value comes from how they can engage followers on social media, because then they can become an influencer for their club or brand or sponsor, whatever it is.
Yep.
Player's value is a very complex, multifaceted analysis. And at a young age, when you don't know anything about it, it allowed me to see it in that manner, rather than read a book and say X, Y, and Z, this is how it's done, which is not how it's done.
Yeah, and that can go both ways, right? I mean, there's been a lot of examples of players where, their behavior off the court diminishes their value tremendously.
Yes, there's many examples.
I mean, Chris Anderson, just for example, early in his career, he was pretty big into methamphetamine. And later in his career, he was with Miami and all this stuff that was really good, but it can go both ways is the point of what I'm saying.
Yeah, absolutely. Off-field trouble or off-court trouble, legal issues, even allegations. And this is something that's particularly aggravating to me, having a criminal defense background in a capacity. Even allegations. Yeah. So a statement that's not found to be true, just a statement that's made, okay? That can hurt a player's value. That can take a player off the court immediately. And I always thought that was unfair, because although we have some factors that are not fair in the current criminal justice system, at the end of the day, 100% innocent till proven guilty, okay?
Yep.
Plain and simple.
In this environment now with #MeToo, I mean, just the allegation is immediately assumed to be true, and from a perception standpoint, which is super important with players, you could lose, so much social value, whether it's on social networking or any of that stuff, just the narrative about this player, and it could be completely false.
Absolutely.
And if you think back, 15 years ago, it's so crazy looking at stuff now. There's situations where it's absolutely true, but nobody's going to argue the Harvey Weinstein stuff didn't happen. But you look back 15 years ago, and Kobe Bryant did some really questionable stuff, and he was exonerated to my knowledge. But if that had happened now, if the same thing had happened with LeBron now, can you even fathom what that would look like from a social media standpoint? Just things haven't changed societally that much, but the tools and the voice that we have has, and everything about LeBron could be destroyed just in one act, and he's the best basketball player in the world. I mean, he's a little bit older now, and there's some argument there, but Kobe's cleaned up his image completely. Nobody talks about the rape allegations at all. But if that same thing had happened in the era of social media, I don't know if somebody recovers from that.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. Would an athlete be able to recover from that? In today's world, we can look at Cristiano Ronaldo. Okay, Cristiano Ronaldo is the king of sports, in my opinion.
Handsome guy too.
Yeah, he's got it all, Mr. Everything. Okay, he was hit with an allegation, and for a few weeks, this was all that was talked about. Now, it's very interesting. I haven't heard as much about it, but when he was hit with the allegation, it was CNN. All the major publications were reporting on it, and it definitely had to have done some damage. However, I think in international soccer, the damage it can do could be different than maybe the NBA or the NFL or MLS.
Because the volume is just so much higher. Those guys have, it's billions of Twitter followers, right? Ronaldo, doesn't he have the biggest?
It's 50 million plus.
It's insane.
50 million plus. Where the point I'm trying to make is that in the NFL and NBA, you really see players given the axe or being benched or being suspended before anything's resolved. Whereas in international soccer, you see more of a reserved approach. Okay, well, let's see what happens at the end of the legal process.
Yeah.
And depending on what happens at the end of the legal process, the regulatory body, FIFA, the country's soccer federation, the club, will then act. Whereas there's numerous situations where the NFL has acted ahead of time. And I'm not saying they should have or should not have, but this is something that could also hit a player's value.
Yeah. And
the fact that an accusation can take him off the field.
And it carries, this isn't just exclusive to sports. Like, you see it right now in business. Like, if a VP of a major company has any kind of allegation against them, the company just sides on the air of caution. Like, they'll just let that person go because public image is so impacted by it, which is, I mean, this is a different discussion than, sports agency and stuff, but it's a dangerous area to be in when just saying somebody did something can dramatically change their life, and you're just basing it off of speculation. There's no due process. And obviously there are cases out there where the person is a piece of shit and they did some terrible things, but that's not fair. I mean, that's why we have a legal system. And I think internationally, some of those clubs probably don't have the pressure on them that like teams or leagues in the US do, because this stuff is so much under the spotlight here. I mean, I don't know if it'll eventually get to that point, but I have a hard time believing like a club team in Europe is going to react to an allegation like that and be like, you know what? We're getting rid of this guy. Like, he's our best player, but we just can't deal with the bad press. Like, he's their best player. Like, he's making them millions of dollars or euros or whatever. And they're willing to take that chance through due process and then make the determination rather than just cutting him immediately.
Yeah. Soccer-wise, that would likely be the approach from the soccer team. Commercial-wise, it all depends on the terms of their endorsement contract.
Yeah.
Whether the terms of the contract allow the player to be vulnerable to a mere accusation, or it has to be what's like felonious, which means that it has to be the conclusion of a legal process.
Yeah.
For the sponsor to be able to just go ahead and say, okay, you breached the contract because you committed a felony. We're done.
Yeah.
So it depends on the terms.
Yeah. Makes sense. So for you, like, working as an agent, what does a day in the life look like for Soroosh?
There really is no day in the life. So right now, I'm working on a few transactions. They're both pretty high profile. One is involving taking a player to the Chinese Super League for the upcoming summer transfer window, which has been an absolute emotional and professional roller coaster for me. I woke up yesterday and I generated an entire report, which is an analysis of the player's current contract juxtapositioned and compared to the offer that's in China for this player. And this goes through an analysis of his salary per game, net salary, tax implications, housing options, lifestyle, and what competing in the Asian marketplace is going to do for him, as opposed to competing in the Major League Soccer marketplace. And a full analysis on that, 10 pages, took me most of the day yesterday. And then I drafted some documents related to that transaction and sent them to be reviewed. And I sat on my couch and watched some soccer while I was doing it, and was very caffeinated throughout the day and didn't do much of anything else. Sat in my massage chair and listened to music. That was a full day's work. And it was very mentally taxing.
Are you traveling with your players a lot too, though, or are you mostly like home base, just working for them and on the phone?
It depends. The busy season, I'm traveling quite a bit, whereas the not busy season, which is the time away from the transfer window, I'm not traveling as much, but I'll still be traveling. So, for example, I just got back 2 weeks ago from a 2-week trip in Costa Rica and Panama, where I met professional soccer teams down there and players.
Yep.
Met with the teams because if they have any good players, I want to be the agent that represents the club. So I can also work and represent the professional soccer teams in transactions, not just the players. So I was networking with them, telling them about myself, my belief in where the MLS marketplace is going and what opportunity that creates for the Panamanian clubs or the Costa Rican clubs. And I also met with some players that I thought would be good clients for mine to try and bring into MLS this summer.
Did you end up doing anything fun in addition to Just working, or
Oh, I went on an exhilarating 7-hour river rafting trip in Cape. What was it? Herradura, uh, Costa Rica.
I think I saw some pictures of that.
Yeah, it was amazing.
Yeah.
It was absolutely amazing.
Did you
I'll
meet
never forget it.
any Panamanian girls down there at all?
No, strictly business.
Yeah, I'm sure. That's cool. So, are most of your new leads like from teams like that, or is it referrals from other players, or like how are you getting new players in addition to your current profile or portfolio of players?
So it's an excellent question. What I've realized is that American players simply are not paid. Okay, the American players just are getting the shaft when it comes to comparative contract analysis. MLS want international players.
Yep.
Okay, those are the guys who are going to be making uh, more higher wages, plain and simple. And what that has done for my business is I've seen that desire, I've seen that demand, and I've been trying to adapt my business to supply that demand. And in doing so, I'm looking to bring in quality international players and bring them to MLS or to the Asian marketplace for a premium salary.
Yep.
An example of that could be Kim Ki-hee, center back for the Seattle Sounders. Another example of that could be taking Obafemi Martins from Seattle to Shanghai. Okay. So I have not been actively recruiting American players lately.
Yep.
What I've been doing is I've been building relationships with different agents from different countries that have access to international players and collaborate with them to perform one-off transactions and bring these players to the teams that want that sort of a player. So much of my day as far as lead generation is contacting my relationships at the different MLS clubs around the league, having conversations, asking them what types of players they're looking for, what positional needs they have, and then I do some market research myself. I ask them what type of a salary they can pay and what type of transfer fee they can pay. And then I'll reach out to my contacts and see what types of options we could generate for them. If they're interested, we start working on the deal.
Yep. Are certain teams easier to work with than others, or I assume there's kind of a unique relationship there where not only are you working with an MLS team to maybe get a guy, but then you're also working on his or his behalf to get the best contract he can. Has there been problems in the past with that, or any contentious relationships as a result of that dynamic?
Problems with clubs?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, there was a general manager who...
Do you want to use his name?
I'd rather not.
Yeah, I
I'd
assume
really.
so.
There was a general manager, and this was a new club in the league last year. And
How many clubs came into the league last year?
I think it was just one.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So somebody can do
Actually,
the math
I think
on
it
that.
was two. I think it was two, one or two. Anyway, I introduced the player to him. I spoke with the player. I said, "Hey, do you like this move?" He's like, "Yeah, I'm totally about the move." I spoke with his agent who was in Germany, and he's like, "Yeah, I'm totally about the move." And I presented the player to the GM, and the GM's like, "Oh yeah, we're really interested in this player. Can you get me something that says that you're working with him?" Okay. And the agent, he said, "Listen. I had a contract with the agent, a collaboration agreement, but he didn't want to relinquish any of his duties to me to negotiate on his client's behalf with the MLS team. So he wasn't going to give me that specific document.
Yep.
I had a contract with the agent. It was a collaboration agreement that says if his player comes to MLS, this is the fee split. These are the different material terms. But I didn't get the specific document that the GM was requesting. The GM just snapped. I sent an email. All three of us were on the email where we were communicating and everything. The guy just then out of nowhere snapped because he didn't get the document he wanted. He was brand new, so that could be part of the reason. He maybe just isn't very experienced. But after that, never worked together. Contact him, nothing. The relationship is completely sour.
Yeah.
So that's one club that you really have to work. The process has to be dictated equally between all the parties, and sometimes you have to adapt the process towards somebody's weaknesses. Like in that general manager, his weakness was lack of experience and competency. So I had to approach that in a different way. I didn't know that because it was the first time we worked together.
Yep. Yeah, I assume as you go throughout your career too, you've gotten better at identifying that stuff. Because when you start out, you're probably just like, everybody's awesome. Like, I'm talking to the teams and all this stuff, and then you start picking up those, unique dynamics that take place from situation to situation.
Well, it's funny. When I was an attorney, I was just a complete asshole. I was like, listen, this is the case. This is the weakness of evidence. I'm going to use this statutory defense. I'm going to sway the jury on this. You will not have a response to this. You've already provided me all your evidence. Please, let's settle. Okay? Whereas in sports, think of all the general managers and presidents you have to work with as the alpha males. Okay?
Yeah.
These are the big like King Kong motherfuckers who pound their chests whenever they get to the negotiation room.
And there's 20 of them?
24.
Yeah.
24
so
teams.
not only are they have that mentality, but then they also are, I'm one of only 24 people doing this job. So it's all just dick and balls and ego.
Exactly. So when you build a relationship, like there's some general managers that I have a very good relationship with, and I call them and we have a great conversation. They'll have significant respect for my opinion and my advice, especially as it relates to the Asian marketplace. Whereas the guys that you don't know, okay, if you don't know a GM and you're just starting to talk to them, they will assume you don't know shit. You're wasting their time. You're a dickhead agent. Okay? So when I approach a new GM, I have to be very, very, it sounds weird to say, oh, I have to be polite, but I have to be almost extra polite.
Yeah, you have to sell yourself in addition to whatever you're trying to.
You have to look into the person like, hey, it's such a pleasure to work with you. I've been following your career. It's so amazing. You made the jump from this to that. Tell me about when you made that transaction at that club. I always looked at it from the outside. You have to kiss ass. And I hate being fake. That's the thing. I think we should all be equal with each other. We should all be honest with each other and admit that we have some interests that are aligned and focus on what's aligned and not focus on what's not aligned, okay? But in business, sometimes you just have to kiss ass. And that's the hardest part of my job, I'd have to say. So to answer your question...
That's the hardest part of my job, too, actually. I think that's the hardest part of most people's job.
Yeah.
Because it's always like a relatively incompetent person in power that's just all ego and, like, maybe at the top, that person's really smart and they got there for a good reason, but everybody on those like sub-tier levels seem to be just like experts at kissing ass.
You really bring up a good point about ego, man. And in professional sports, ego is rampant. The players, especially the types of players I work with, the high-profile guys that I want to take to for the mega lucrative deals in China, okay, to take to the Chinese marketplace. And the Chinese agent I work with, huge ego. The Chinese teams, even bigger. They think they own the world because they're paying more money than any other team.
And it's China, so it's a powerhouse.
Honestly, and I'm in the middle of it. I'm representing the player, and I'm trying to advocate for the player. So the player says, I gotta make more money. That guy's on that type of money. No, I'm way better. So I gotta make more than that guy. Okay. And now the qualifier is more than that guy. The qualifier is not, well, you're going to be netting 67.8% more earnings. Every time you touch a ball, it's going to be 3 times as much per game than your prior. They don't give a shit about those metrics.
It's just
I got to make more than that fucker who I'm better than. Okay? So imagine that. I'm reasoning with this guy. Then I'm reasoning with the Chinese guy who says, no, fuck you, fuck the player. This is China. He make 2 times money. Fuck you, fuck him, okay? And then I have to, and then I'm left with nothing. I'm like, okay, I made no progress with the player. I made no progress with the Chinese side of the transaction. What am I going to do to bring the sides together? How am I going to persuade in this negotiation?
Is the solution to kiss ass?
The solution is to reframe. Reframing the issues is a very integral tool to any advocate, in any negotiation. Reframing the issues when it comes to a disagreement with the spouse. Reframing the issues as it relates to a difference in benefits or compensation in negotiations. So I asked the player, well, why do you want to make more than this player? Well, because I'm worth more. And then I ask, well, why is the current offer not fitting your needs? What type of lifestyle do you want to live? So you want this. You want that. Okay, well, the team's going to give you a furnished hotel residence at the Westin, top floor, penthouse. It's going to be $15,000 a month. Okay, so your lifestyle element of your desires, would you say it's satisfied? Yeah, I guess so. Okay, well, let's move on to the financial. What are you going to need to – how much money do you want to make after your playing career? Or how much money do you want to have saved up, I should say, okay? Well, if you play in this market, you're going to be making X amount more than what you're currently making. Multiply that by this amount. Add anticipated, reasonably projected bonuses, okay? And in this marketplace, there's a higher likelihood that you're going to be rewarded with an extension or a restructuring if you perform to this level. Okay?
On top of the fact that the Chinese fans are going to love you. Like, compared to, I would assume international players, like, they get so much attention.
There's only 3 of them on every team. There's only 3 foreigners on every team, so that they are the stars of the team. Yeah.
Compared to here, where you're one of a sea of guys. I mean, and the MLS is nowhere, not to be disrespectful, but it's like LeBron James versus the best MLS player. Like, it's not, right now the league is so nascent that like it's still growing. I mean, maybe someday those two will be compared, but like soccer internationally is way more popular than it is in the U.S. It's
Soccer's,
changing.
Yeah, by far the most popular sport in the world.
So it's in the player's favor from a image and reputation to go abroad, I would think.
Exactly. In reframing the issues, that is a point that you utilize to say, listen, in regards to your market value, if you ply your trade in the Asian marketplace, at the end of your contract, you're going to be, hypothetically, let's say 32 years old if you take this opportunity in China. At age 32, you're going to be a free agent. If you just play in MLS, your market value is not going to be very attractive in the Asian marketplace, which is paying more money. Therefore, it is an incentive to take your trade to the Asian marketplace, perform on that contract for a certain amount of time, and when you hit free agency, different types of markets are going to open up to you, like Saudi Arabia, not to say anyone want to fucking live there, Qatar, Dubai, Japan, South Korea, whereas they're not going to be paying attention to the player if he hasn't been in the Asian marketplace before.
Yep.
So
makes sense.
Reframing the issues, emphasizing the benefits, and you have to be sometimes not the punching bag, but very empathetic to the emotions of the athlete and the emotions of the team. Sometimes you'd hope they'd be more professional, but sometimes they're just as emotional.
I'm trying to think of like a visual of what it must feel like for you, because it's like being on a boat in this big ocean. You got your guy with you, and there's just so many currents going all these different ways, and all you're trying to do is get to that destination, but it's like everything's working against you.
Let me tell you something, man. I go from on a multi-million-dollar transaction, I go from thinking to myself, oh my God, okay, the player says yes, okay, like everything looks like it's gonna work out.
Yeah.
I stop myself from doing this, but I start thinking about, I can't wait to spend a month in Indonesia, or I'm gonna buy an R8 or something like that.
All that.
And then the second the player something happens, the team backs out, the team revises something like that. You feel terrible. You're gutted.
Yeah.
Okay. In the end, it's all worth it. I feel so alive doing this work, but in no other situation in my life have ever gone from such high of highs to low of lows to waking up the next morning. There's a new development negotiated so high, only for something else to come up to go so low. It is such a
essentially what you're doing is gambling, because you don't know if these contracts are going to work out. The higher contracts are probably higher risk in terms of
Absolutely.
whether or not they go through or not. And there's probably a lot more that can go wrong in a bigger contract than a smaller player contract. So you could have like 20 players that go for it. Get yourself one of those Mexican Cokes if you want.
I'm going to get this mango LaCroix.
There you go. La Croix.
LaCroix.
So, I mean, it obviously must be bigger money to have one big contract, but if you got all your eggs in that one basket, that's a lot of accumulated risk.
Yeah, the risk can be risk is absolutely present through failure of the transaction. That is a risk, but something that makes success even more important is the work product. I don't just look at a transaction from how much money am I going to make, how much money is the player going to make, how much, what's the financial net for everyone involved. Work product is also very significant to me, as that'll help me continue my positive momentum. So I look at myself as kind of like a graph. From the moment I graduated law school, where's my career been going? I want to keep growing. I want to keep building on my skills. I want to keep building transactions. I want to keep building on my work product. Okay?
And you learn from those mistakes and failures, right? Like, as cliche as that sounds, like if every deal went through really well, you'd probably be kind of a shitty sports agent because you never would look for issues or things that could go wrong. And I'm sure, like, over time, you've gotten a lot better as a result of things that have gone wrong, and you can spot those issues ahead of time.
Absolutely. Anticipating different risks that can occur during the transaction. Yes, I've gotten much better at anticipating those. My former client, Obafemi Martins, this guy was an incredible player.
Yeah.
Okay, he performed at a very high level in MLS. He did very well internationally as well earlier in his career. He did very well in China when we took him there. But the guy is an absolute psycho. Okay, he's just an absolute lunatic.
Yeah.
I remember we were at we went down to the ESPYs. He was nominated as best player in America, competing in America. And the day before, we went to a jewelry shop. It was like a Ben Bridge or something like that. And it was like a $200,000 presidential Rolex where the 12 o'clock had a certain gem, the 3 o'clock had a certain gem, the 6 o'clock had a certain gem, the 9 o'clock had a certain gem, okay? $200,000 watch. And I had just negotiated his $14.4 million contract for him. And I kind of was like, hey, man, that's not the best decision right now. Yeah, you have money, but you don't own any property. You've got a meeting with a financial advisor. Before you pull the trigger, you should really
maybe we should
wait.
look at Shane Co. for a minute instead of the Ben Bridge.
So he just looks at me like a psycho, okay?
Yeah.
And he says, hey, who's the lawyer? And I say, me. And he says, who makes the money?
Yeah.
I say, I guess you. He's like, that's right.
Yeah.
I make the money. And then he buys a fucking watch in front of my face. What a flex, right?
Oh yeah.
What a flex of outstanding proportion.
Did he have the money yet?
Oh, he had the money.
Okay,
Yeah.
because it would have been funnier if it was just false flexing too, like it was all on credit at the time.
he had the money.
Yeah.
Yes,
but just super intense. Like, that's a weird conversation to have with your agent too. Like,
and keep in mind, I was 25 years old. I think. I think I was 24. Yeah, I was 25 years. I was about to turn 25. Okay. And this is my first big client.
Yeah.
My life is changing as far as my business revenue, the types of players that I can now work with, my work product, having recently negotiated his contract. Everything is changing for me. I can't fuck it up with this player.
And just from a friendship standpoint too, like that's kind of a good friend move to be like, hey man, like, I know you want to do you, but 200 grand on a watch is a lot of money. Like, I mean, it just being that voice of reason to anybody is a good thing to do as a person. It's not like you were telling him what he should or shouldn't do. You were just saying like, hey man, I know this seems fun right now, but you're going to lose like half the value of that watch as soon as we walk out of this store. And, you know, it sounded like kind of a stupid watch too. So,
but here's the thing. It takes a certain specimen, man, to walk out onto a field in front of 40, 50,000 roaring fans to see an opposing team who want to absolutely mess you up and to overcome that and say, no, I can.
Yeah.
No, I will. I'm the best. It takes a certain attitude.
Yeah.
But this guy can't turn that off when he gets into the real world.
And you can't really – this is an interesting topic because I know a lot of people that are super successful in business, and it's not different in sports or other walks of life. And people get upset at times where they have unique personalities that are not neurotypical. And it's because people are holding them to the same criteria of everybody else. Like, this guy is operating at different wavelengths from everybody else. And that probably didn't sound like he probably took it as you questioning him as a person. Like, it's a defense mechanism. Like, why is he thinking that I don't deserve this? I'm the best soccer player in the U.S. And that's not what you were saying at all. It was just like, hey man, that's a lot of money for a watch. But somebody like that, they don't have the same coping mechanisms that a quote unquote normal person does. And that's why they're also able, like, it's a double-edged sword. They can perform at a super high level, but they also don't have the normal social skills of like a quote unquote normal human being.
In some instances, yeah, some
Yeah.
players do have those.
Not all
those
of them,
issues,
obviously. Like, and what's a good example of a pro athlete that, like, Mike Trout seems like he's got his shit together. Like
Peyton Manning.
Yeah.
These are good, well-rounded individuals.
those commercials though are pretty tough.
What, the Papa John's ones?
Those and the guitar. Who's he playing guitar with? It's like an insurance